They've hurled white paint at the gates of the Houses of Parliament. Now they've targeted a high-end steakhouse in London. And the waitresses did what many have wanted to do with these protesters for a while. Take a look.
Thank you for the market. Good night. Good night. Thank you very much, ladies.
Well, joining me now is Animal Rebellion spokesman Nathan McGovern and celebrity chef Aldo Zilli. Got it right this time. He picked me up on it. It's Aldo, not Aldo. Aldo's a very British pronunciation of an Italian name. Good to see you both. Nathan, let's start with you. I don't like vegans very much.
Yeah, okay. So that's basically the setup. Nathan is with Animal Rebellion. They do protests, and Piers Morgan doesn't like vegans. So that's sort of the setup there. Okay, and so like I was saying earlier, let me get this Word document up. A lot of people had very positive reactions to this, and I had a sort of different reaction to it. So I kind of want to go over what I was thinking when I was watching this video. And so the first question I was sort of asking myself is like, what is the purpose of getting on Piers Morgan? Like, what's the purpose of this this sort of interview, right? And it seems that people with Animal Rebellion and other like direct action sort of things, it seems like one of the benefits of doing it is that you get on some sort of mainstream media outlet where your voice is magnified like way, way, way more than it would be otherwise, right? So I think like Sky News Australia here, what I'm looking at is what, 3 million subscribers, okay? So just like to put that into context, like Earthling Ed has like what, 400,000 or 500,000? So this is like 6 times bigger than Earthling Ed. And it's going to be hitting an audience that Earthling Ed wouldn't hit, right? So like Earthling Ed has a specific audience that his stuff targets. So we're getting massive reach and a reach to an audience we normally wouldn't have access to, right? And so I think that's an important part of this, to then ask, okay, well, what are we doing with that access that we have to them? So the first thing is kind of like, what are these appearances for? And what I would argue that they're for is for shifting the Overton window. And so if you don't know what the Overton window is, let me just show you real quick. So it's the range of ideas that are tolerated in public discourse and according to whatever like the current climate is. So I think this is a really good picture to depict it. And so what I like to think of is, okay, when Nathan is there speaking, right, there's going to be a range of people who look at veganism and vegan policies in various ways, right? They might think that they're all the way from unthinkable to radical to acceptable to sensible, or they might be in the Overton window of being popular and just making them into policy. So if what we're targeting is vegans, vegans are already in this window, right? It's like we don't really need to convince vegans too much of that these ideas should be popular or we should make policies based off of them, right? The people who are outside this window are largely going to be non-vegans, right? And these are the people we want to move into the window variously. So then the question is, like, who are we aiming at? And so the answer seems to be non-vegans, for me at least, right? Maybe we can argue about what the point of this is. But to me, the point seems to be to shift the Overton window. And to do that, we need to target non-vegans, right? And so if we go back here to the Word document, right? Then the next thing we want to ask is sort of what are our constraints and how do we want to go about achieving this? So I think as far as how do we achieve this, I think what I am a fan of is doing these things, which is centering the victim, using concrete examples, and using examples that stick in people's memory, specifically things that they don't already know. And the reason for that is because people are fighting 2 really strong biases called status quo bias and confirmation bias. And confirmation bias, most people have heard of. It's basically just this idea that you believe what you already believe, and you kind of seek out information in that way. And it also kind of dovetails with this thing called desirability bias, whereas you believe what you want to believe. What people don't know is that it kind of breaks down into 3 separate categories of the way that the confirmation bias works. And it's the way that the way that you seek out information, the way that you interpret information, and then the way that you remember information, okay? And so part of what this does is when you get on Piers Morgan is you're taking this seek out part and you're just like blasting everyone with it, right? People can't help but watch it. So it doesn't matter if they're seeking it out or not. So we've got that one covered. So then the question is, how do we hit on these interpret and remember metrics, right? And so for remembering, this is why it's important to use concrete examples, examples that they haven't heard before, and examples that like are really emotionally evocative, right? Because it's very easy to like hear something, you know, and then a day later you forget about it. And that happens all the time with confirmation bias stuff. As far as interpretation, this would be like actually in the interview, like if Piers Morgan says something like about bees, for instance, and you give your interpretation to that data or to that argument, right? That's how you would meld the interpretation. Now, because of the constraints we're going to talk about, I don't think we have very much we can do with the interpretation. I think we can only tweak this a little bit, right? And so I think we've already got the seek out. And so I think what we want to do is hit really hard on the remember part of sort of disarming the confirmation bias. And so that's because of the constraints that are sort of present in this conversation. So when I'm talking about this, I sort of both mean like what you would do in a normal media interview, but I'm actually really super focused on just Piers Morgan because Piers Morgan isn't really an interview. It's not really clear what it is. It's kind of just a big shit show. The thing that I think of when I think about what this is like is I imagine like the vegan or Nathan like has a megaphone and he's running up to different people trying to like yell a message at them. And he's not talking to Piers Morgan. He's not trying to convince Piers Morgan. Piers will be convinced of nothing. Piers is basically just there like throwing shit at him while he's trying to take his megaphone and yell at people, right? And I think that's kind of the way that one should approach these interviews, is that Piers is essentially just like an obnoxious obstacle in the way, and you're just trying to kind of maneuver around him. I don't think you actually want to engage Piers that much, and I kind of talk about that later when I talk about what I think like Nathan could have said in certain instances. Okay, so how are they constrained? Well, they're constrained in a bunch of ways. One, they have very short periods of time to talk as the vegan. Two, he's extremely hostile. He's not going to change his mind. He's going to interrupt you constantly. And then there's this other shit which kind of sucks, which really gives him a lot of power, which I'm just calling technical tomfoolery. And it's basically like they can change the camera angles, makeup, wardrobe, lighting, and the way they mess with the audio. And if you watch that interview with Nathan and David Rands, he actually talks about a lot of this. So whenever he holds up the bingo, right, you can't see the bingo. He's just holding up a piece of paper. They could have zoomed in on that. He's pointing it right at a camera, and they just chose not to, obviously, right? Makeup, he posits there that in the makeup room, they had him in the makeup chair for a super long time, and they were trying to make him pale. They made him change his shirt, the original shirt that he had on. Of course, they can mess with lighting. And then he also says how they messed with his audio, like they drop his audio down whenever he's like saying something important, or if like Piers is like talking over him or something, they just like knock his audio down. And that's because everyone is mic'd separately there, right? So those are the constraints, and that's a lot of constraints to deal with. So this is the other thing, is that this is like maybe the most difficult sort of interview to do. I think you have, this is like the Mount Everest of interviews to do. Okay. So given that, I want to watch the video with this in mind, right? The idea that we're trying to shift the Overton window for non-vegans, and we're going to try to like center the victim and use concrete examples and things like that. I think that's the way to go. And so if that is our ideal, which again, you guys can disagree with me if that's the ideal. If that is the ideal, then I want to see like how far does Nathan stray from that ideal, and when does he hit it, when does he not? So that's basically the setup for this. Oh, one other thing, I did do math for this because I have to do math for all my videos. I looked at how much time they actually had to speak, and on average, anytime, this is not counting when they're just like going back and forth yelling at each other, but as far as actually like having time to sit there and like talk for any extended period of time, Nathan had about on average 12.5 seconds every time he was able to talk. And that was front loaded towards the beginning. So in the beginning, he's got 19 seconds immediately followed by 13 seconds. And then he has like 5, 10, 23, 6, 11, 13. But the 9 and the 13 are like really like there's only a minor interruption. So he actually has about 30 seconds to talk right in the beginning. And that's important because the other interview with Orla, if you've seen it, hers was also front loaded with 20 seconds right up in the beginning. And then she only had 2 more times where she had like any sort of chance to talk at length. And so this will become important later because I think if you're doing an interview with Piers, you want to front load your message and get a lot out right in the beginning, because he's going to start to like interrupt and go into like whatever shenanigans he has planned with like sad bee music and stuff. So yeah, so let's just kind of watch through the interview and kind of you'll see what we think about it here. So let's take this on and play.
I don't think any of you look very healthy.
I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, I think you all look pretty pasty-faced and unhealthy to me. But that's your choice.
So not to interrupt too early, but I think this is one of the best things he does, which is to just kind of be like fun and silly. I think like, you know, if you go too meek, everyone's going to be like, oh, typical weak vegan. If you go too hard, they're going to be like, oh, how militant and aggressive, right? And so like you're kind of in a lose-lose situation in most of these, but I think the hardest demeanor to criticize is just a sort of fun, laughy demeanor. And so I think taking that with Piers whenever he's doing this sort of like fuck you, I don't like vegans. I think that's probably sort of like the ideal stance to take there. Yeah, I think he had on like a t-shirt or something before is what he was saying.
What I don't do is I don't go running into vegan restaurants and start screaming abuse at you all and have to be pulled out by people because you're ruining everyone's fun. Why do you do that to meat eaters?
Well, Piers, you've started on an absolute blinder today. I actually brought a little game with me for Aldo, perhaps the audience to play. It's a Piers Morgan vegan bingo. Maybe we get a zoom on that from the camera. And you've actually just ticked off one straight away. I'll just go with that. We're looking at row or a column already. So the thing is, within...
Okay. So he's got a lot of time to talk right there. I think that was like maybe 19 seconds there. And what he does with it is basically sets up this gag with the bingo card. And before I get into this, I just want to say, I think it's funny. I thought it was like a clever thing to do or whatever. And it kind of amused me. I thought it was fun to watch. However, I don't think this plays well to a non-vegan audience. And I have some videos later I'll show you where people are like kind of breaking this down or just like critiquing it or whatever, non-vegans. And it does not play well with them at all. They say it's corny. They're like, I don't understand this. Like, to us, we all know that we hear these things all the time, right? We hear the same excuses constantly, and we know that there's like a million rebuttals to them. Like all these things have been rebutted not only a million times, but from like a million different angles, right? And yeah, exactly. Juggling vegan. That's exactly what they said. And this makes sense, right? Because think about it from a non-vegan's perspective. They just see him getting out this bingo card and saying like, oh, you said this objection, you said this objection, right? Well, to them, they're just like, okay, so answer the objection, right? So like think of it two ways, right? Let's say the non-vegan's watching this and they say, oh, that was a really good objection that Piers had. And then he just goes and checks it off on his bingo. So they're going to be like, well, why is he dismissing that and just checking off the bingo? It's probably because he doesn't have a good answer for it. Because if he did have a good answer for it, he would have just said it. He wouldn't have checked it off on bingo. And if it's someone watching who thinks it's a bad objection and is already maybe even a little aligned against Piers and it's like, yeah, that's a pretty bad objection. Well, they're going to think, well, if it's such a bad objection, why not just rebut it? Like, that was a really stupid objection, so just say what's wrong with it. Why are you checking it off on your bingo when you can just, say X, Y, Z? And so I think, like, this is one of these things, and there's this concept called the curse of knowledge, which I'll show you here. And it's basically this idea that, like, when you know a concept really well, and it also kind of works when you're in, like, a community, and you sort of understand these things really well, it kind of affects the way that you communicate that to other people. And basically, I think this is a good visual of it, is like, this is what you think you're communicating, but what you're actually communicating is this. Because from knowing things really well, and like we all know these things really well, right? We can fill in all the gaps that you don't explain. But to the person who's not familiar, they aren't filling in these gaps. So this can either look just confusing to them, they can take the wrong message from it, they don't understand. And so I don't think that the bingo card, if our goal is to talk to non-vegans, I don't think it's a very strategic move. Again, I totally think it's funny. Like it cracked me up when he was doing it. And I like that he kind of like, stuck it to Piers a little bit there. But I don't think it's the move. I don't think it's the thing to do here.
In years, technology like precision fermentation, alt protein is going to produce the exact same products that you love right now, using a fraction of the land, producing a fraction of the carbon
footprint. But I like
footprint.
eating meat.
It's the exact same product.
No, but I like eating meat.
Fine. You'd be eating the exact same product.
In fact, the
but
more
without
you
the
guys do
expectation
this
of
kind of thing, the
animals.
more...
Okay, so this is the second part. And I think my criticism is not going to be this strong throughout, but I think the beginning of this was really weak. And I think this is the second part that kind of confused me. So Nathan is here for Animal Rebellion, right? He's talking about like climate change, and I presume also, I don't totally know their mission, like how much like animal rights and welfare is part of their thing as well, but it's just like animals as they relate to climate change. But you know, in another reaction video I saw here, someone was just like, he didn't answer Piers' question. And he really didn't. And I don't think that Piers asked a question that was like, he should be avoiding. He was basically like, why are you doing this? Like, what is the point of doing this? To me, that's the huge invitation for like the hard sell. This is why. These are the horrible things that happen. These are the horrible things that are going to happen, right? And instead he goes off on a thing about cultivated meat, which again is weird to me because cultivated meat doesn't even exist yet, you know, in any sort of like actual capacity where like the average person can buy it. And so like that might be 3 years away, it might be 5 years away, it might be 20 years away, like we don't know. So this doesn't give anyone anything actionable to actually do. And it also doesn't express why he's out there doing that. He didn't go out there and like, you know, do direct action because cultivated meat is coming out. He did it because what we do to animals is atrocious and there's like a climate catastrophe coming, right? Or we're already in the midst of it. And so like, this is just kind of strange to me to go off on a cultivated meat kick here. It seems like the weirdest, like, again, I don't want to be attacking him or anything. And maybe there was a plan behind this that I just don't understand. That's totally possible. But I just didn't get why, like of all places, cultivated meat seems to me to be almost like the weakest place to go here. So yeah, very strange to me. And at the end, as we watch through this, I'll kind of say what I think should have been said in the beginning. But it does get better. I think he does start to get his legs here as we go on.
The more meat I want to eat.
That's absolutely fine.
It's true.
That's fine. That's
You
fine.
literally, it's a bit. Honestly, it's true. The more stuff you do like this,
Sorry, I didn't catch that. It's true, is it? You've said that about 3 times. I didn't quite catch it. That you like eating meat.
Yes.
You know? Oh, thanks. I didn't get it the first 3 times.
How committed a vegan are you?
That again, to me, that's kind of funny because I like that he's like sticking it to Piers, but I just don't know how that plays to a non-vegan audience. I feel like that is gonna play like, I don't know, like overly smug or something. And again, this is the toughest part because people are always gonna criticize you, and so like the sort of like emotional tenor of what you're going for is, I think, probably the most difficult part of this. I think in some places he does really well. That place kind of like made me go, I don't know if that was like what we should have done there.
How committed a vegan am I?
Do you drink almond milk?
Oh, you've ticked off another one. Fantastic, Piers. You are on an absolute
Does it have
roll.
answering questions?
I don't know. I'll keep that one hidden from you. Take the fun out of the game.
Can you just answer questions? Otherwise, it's not much of an interview. I mean, you have your little chart, but do you drink almond milk?
No.
Do you eat almonds?
No.
Do you eat avocado?
No.
What do you eat? What do you drink?
I love seasonal British fruit and veg.
Right.
You know, I love supporting British farmers. I love going to farmers markets, seeing what they have to offer. You know, I love eating a plant-based
But most
diet.
science now says that if you...
Okay, so I think that was a combination of good and bad. So okay, let's do a tangent real quick about the ethics of lying here. Okay, is it okay to lie in this instance? I think the case to be made for lying here about eating almonds and avocados would be that this entire thing is basically a farce. And so like, it's not really an interview in any real sense of the word. So like maybe if he lies here and then later in a follow-up video, he's like, hey guys, by the way, I eat almonds and avocados and this is why I said that. And this is like the blah, 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 right? Maybe that is like a thing to do. I don't know. I'm not going to comment on whether or not the lying here is the move in general, but I will say if you're going to lie better than this. This is another thing when I'm watching these videos, people are like, he's full of shit. Like he clearly just saw that other interview and then lied about this. And I think the problem is that he didn't commit to the lie early enough on. Piers asked him and he was like basically saying he wasn't going to answer it. And then Piers had to pull teeth to get him to answer it. So obviously if the answer was no to begin with, why wouldn't he have answered it, right? And then when he does ask him, he just goes, no. If you're going to tell a lie, usually you want it to be kind of like a little specific or just like just a short amount of background, nothing too crazy. So like he could have said something like no, I'm actually allergic to almonds, or like, you know, yeah, I actually think that avocados are really gross. They kind of taste like plastic to me for some reason, you know, give like a little something there. That's not just like, no, I don't eat almonds. No, I don't eat avocados. You know, I think if you're going to commit to the lie, know that you're committing to the lie beforehand. Don't not answer the question, just like answer it right away and answer it in a sort of casual way that has like maybe just like a little bit of a story behind, you know, I'm allergic to that or something like that. If you're going to lie. I think there's other ways to answer that question, which I'll kind of like talk about at the end though, but yeah.
Don't have a balanced diet is actually unhealthy for you.
Yeah, exactly. that's why a plant-based diet, a balanced plant-based diet is healthy.
Aldo.
Yeah, nailed it. I think that was just like the perfect. He doesn't have a lot of time to talk. He just crunched this concept into like a very short window. He's like, yeah, duh, like you can eat a balanced plant-based diet, right? I think that was really good. I think this is probably one of the best moments of the interview. And sorry, the thing where he says, "I eat local fruits and vegetables," and he like keeps hammering home that he's eating local. You know what I mean? And so Piers doesn't really have much to say there at that point. He kind of short circuits Piers' whole thing about bees and almonds and that.
What do you feel? I mean, your restaurant is very close to where this happened, right? What do you feel about these activists running in, ruining people's meals?
Listen, 25 years ago, I opened one of the first vegetarian restaurants in London, Soho. And if it was now, it's probably more successful. Then it didn't get very successful. But anyway, cut long story short. I don't have any problems. I've written a vegetarian book, not a vegan book. I don't have any problems with veganism and vegetarian people because I have restaurants. I'm a consultant for a number of restaurants, number of restaurant companies, and we have vegan and vegetarians on menus. So I don't understand when it gets out of hand that these people have to disrupt our business.
Because they have no respect for meat eaters. But if we were doing the same thing to them, they'd all go nuts, right, wouldn't you? You'll go nuts. I came running into your little vegan hellholes and began screaming abuse. You'd all throw your toys out the pram, as you do on a daily basis.
I'm not throwing my toys out the pram right now, Piers. I'm loving this, to be honest.
What are you loving?
I'm loving this open conversation that we're having about this actual quite.
But why do you have
issue.
to go and do a restaurant and disrupt our business, disrupt the customers, other people that want to eat the meat, other people that want to enjoy themselves, they want to go and have a night out? I don't have any problems with you guys coming to our restaurants and ordering a vegan dish. In fact, in January, we always do a veganuary, and we go through a lot of different ingredients to create menus for you guys. I don't understand why we have to suffer your mentality of coming to our restaurants and trying to disrupt the customers that are having a fantastic time and they want to eat a steak.
What's the answer?
No, it's actually a good question, Aldo. And actually, it's fantastic that you create fantastic vegan dishes. The fact of the matter is, when we look at high-end restaurants, Salt-Based restaurant, Manor up in Manchester that was also disrupted at the weekend, these are symbols of a broken system.
Why? Because he makes nice
symbols of a broken system.
Okay, so this, again, I think this is a combination of good and bad. This is another really strong part in the interview when, what did he just say to Aldo? He's basically like, that's a really good question. We appreciate that or whatever. So he's like finding common ground with him. And he also is able to switch really quickly between his two demeanors. So this is the other thing. If you didn't see that David Rand's interview, he didn't know Aldo was going to be there. So that was a surprise to him when he walked out that Aldo was even there. So again, like this is what I'm saying, all this stuff behind the scenes that they can kind of like fuck with you. But I think what they're trying to do here is Piers is trying to get him riled up and really pissed off. And Aldo is like very sort of calm and like seems like a likable guy, right? And so what they want is they want him to transfer his anger onto Aldo and like be an asshole to him because like Piers is kind of like poking him, right? And so this is, I think, a really strong thing that he did that is like maybe not as that noticeable, but I think a lot of people would have done that and would have maybe got mad at Aldo. And I think this is really strong and something that like is easy to overlook there. Also, it is just funny, like I feel like he even says like, I think him and Aldo talked afterwards and they were kind of like having a good time. And like, he said it was a very nice conversation. And it just like goes to show like how, when you have some asshole like Piers who's like trying to like just get clicks and like outrage porn and all that, like if you really just sit down, if a vegan sits down with a non-vegan, you tend to be able to have a pretty productive conversation with them, but of course that's obviously not what Piers wants here.
Where, there's 1,500 quid getting charged for a steak.
Why is he making millions
Can I please
around
make
the
my point?
world?
I was in one of his restaurants last week in Qatar. Loved it. Fantastic. But he served me. I've got a clip, I think, of him.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to show it up. So I was wondering how long.
Why is he doing it backwards? I don't understand. This is so weird. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's not really a critique, but just like what?
Trick. He taught me.
You weren't very good at it.
He then actually cooked it in front of me and he fed me, actually, directly fed me the meat into my mouth. It was delicious. Loved it.
Fine.
Loved it.
I would invite any vegans.
But if you'd run in and tried to interrupt and just ruin everyone's night, I would have done what those waitresses did, just thrown you out.
That's absolutely fine.
So what's the point of it all? What does it achieve? None of you make me want to change my mind. I just think, what annoying little squits. Honestly, I do. It's the same when you're chucking paint at Van Gogh paintings. It's the same when you're tying yourself to fuel pumps or hanging yourself on bridges and stopping people using Dartford Tunnel. It's all the same. You're just all too annoying. So the British public don't like annoying people. And they don't like their lives being disrupted. They want their freedom to have a choice. The choices I had in Qatar last week to have Salt Bay's restaurant, to do this to my mouth.
Can you imagine someone coming in and disrupting your evening?
Have you got the clip? We haven't got the clip.
Oh, wish.
Oh, he's running, okay.
No, but can you imagine you coming to our restaurants and then you get some people coming to your table and trying to disrupt your evening? It's abuse.
I'm going to start running into vegan restaurants.
That's fine.
Just
That's
shouting
right,
and being
that's
annoying,
right to protest
grabbing
against.
tables, and so you can't eat your gruel, and just see how you not like it. I'm going to go to your house and chuck paint all over it.
Piers, you've got a right to protest. Oh, you've got me another one.
Stick it off your bingo.
Fantastic.
Stick it off your bingo, son.
Where's the salt? Where's it?
Won't get any of this gruel.
That's
Just put that
fantastic.
to one side, but I will have a bit of steak. Just to...
You didn't salt it though.
You see, all you've achieved is you've made me want to do this. Just
That's
eat that lovely-
absolutely fine. You go for it.
Do you know how many steaks he's had from my restaurant?
So I think I'm probably going to stop it there. There's not really too much else that gets said here. Maybe up into the end here. Let me just show you something here.
You just can't be annoying all the time. You can't just ruin everyone's fun and their lives, walking around like you have the only way forward for life and the universe, the Nathan McGovern rule book.
It's not me.
Thou shalt do this, this, and this.
Oxford
Unless you're
University.
Meghan and Harry, then you
It's
can do what you
Harvard
like.
University. It's the IPCC peers. This isn't me. I'm not a scientist.
Right.
I'm perfectly
Thank
happy
you.
to admit
I think
that.
we'll leave it
People
on the fact
from the
that
University of
so
Oxford,
you're not an expert.
the University of Harvard,
You're not an expert.
IPCC. Neither are you, and you should listen to
You're
them.
not an expert. I think we'll leave it at that. Nathan,
Don't
thank
come
you.
to...
Good to see you.
don't
Sorry
come-
we didn't get them all ticked off.
You got me. You got me a comment. You got me a comment. It's fine.
Don't come and annoy my customers.
Shouty and insects. Oh yeah, insects, yeah. Good to see you both. Thank you. Aldo, great to
See, they even kind of have like a little bit of like a nice moment there at the end. One thing I did skip here is that, and this if you're if you're in the UK, explain this to me. Piers basically like asked him if he like is cool with, I think, Meghan Markle flying a private jet, and he doesn't answer right away, which is really confusing. It's another time when I feel like he should just be like, yeah, she shouldn't be flying a private jet. Like, like it doesn't seem like there's anything controversial there as far as him being like with Animal Rebellion. It just seems like private jets are a no-no. And so I don't know why he has a hard time saying that. But yeah, so that's kind of what that was like kind of like the last like relevant thing there. Mostly it was just like Piers, like, I don't know, whatever, just jerking off for the rest of it. But yeah, so I guess thinking back, right? Okay, if we're looking at that interview and we're thinking we want to target non-vegans, we want to center the victim, we want to use concrete examples, and we want to use examples that stick in memories, right? I just don't think he hit on very many of those at all. Okay, so what I have that he sort of hit on here at the end is, this is what it seemed to me like he communicated, right? And that is, there's going to be cultivated meat sometime in the future, okay? Okay, there's going to be cultivated meat sometime in the future, okay? We have a broken system. We should have affordable travel. That's something he says when he's talking about Meghan Markle. And then non-vegan diets can be balanced. Those are basically the only things I saw communicated there. And I'm thinking from a non-vegan perspective, what has been said here? We have a broken system. This is pretty vague. This doesn't mean much. This is also something that will like sort of, I think, push away a certain percentage of people, because like we have a broken system tends to be, well, I guess maybe populists on either side kind of think that, you know, but it just doesn't give a very like concrete, yeah, like, so what? Like, that doesn't mean you should be, you know, pouring milk out or whatever, right? That just because we have a broken system doesn't mean you should be doing X. Cultivated meat in the future, you know, I already kind of gave my general critique of that. Again, it's in the future, and it's also like possibly in the future, and we don't know how far it is in the future, so there's no actionable item in there. We should have affordable travel. Again, just like, of course, I don't think anyone's going to agree that we shouldn't have affordable travel. None of this really communicates the urgency of the situation, right? And the urgency of the situation is what sort of vindicates these direct actions that are taken. If the situation isn't important and isn't urgent, then it seems weird that you would be out there like, you know, doing disruptions, right? Disruptions are because the situation is urgent or because no one's listening, right? And so I don't think that was communicated at all, even though in the beginning, Piers basically like asks him why. He's like, why is this important, essentially? The best thing he communicates here is that non-vegan diets can be balanced. I think that's probably the strongest point as far as communication to non-vegans. I would have just done something though, where like I kind of pointed out the dietitians associations that actually say that, because that sort of strengthens it. It also gives something that people can go look up later potentially if they want to. But it adds an air of like authority and credibility that him just saying there are balanced diets doesn't, right? Like anyone can just say that. So that's kind of my like broad scale analysis of what he said and like how effective that might be. Now, the question is, so what should he have said instead? And I'm going to start off something here where I talk about front loading. So if you notice, sometimes what Piers does is he kind of waits for you to get to the end of like a normal point and then starts interrupting and starts like firing stuff off or changing the subject. So like if he were to say, well, yeah, you can actually eat a a balanced plant-based diet. It's very healthy. I mean, you can look at the American Dietetics or the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. You can look at the UK. You can look at the Canadian dietitians. You can look at Australian dietitians, right? But as soon as you say it's balanced and you can be healthy, and then you start to say the next thing, Piers is going to jump in and interrupt. So I think what you need to do is actually front load with a bunch of words that it's not quite clear where you're going, and then hit your point right at the end after you front loaded stuff. So in this example, I say, okay, so if he says something about it not being healthy, be like, actually, so America, Canada, Australia, and UK, all of them, they all have dietetics associations that say that vegan diets are healthy for all stages of life, right? So that way, you've already front loaded all the authority and those extra points that he's going to try to debunk and just kind of like obfuscate if you were to just say, yeah, they're healthy, and then you're getting interrupted, right? And there's another instance here where I'll show you where I think you can like front load some stuff to try to prevent that with Piers. And again, this is very Piers specific. So this is like, I think if you even have like a moderately hostile interviewer, you probably wouldn't have to do this so much. But yeah, Piers is basically the worst. He's fucking terrible. Okay, so like I said when I was talking about the maths, right? It looks like he has about 12.5 seconds on average to talk, and overall he had about 100 seconds. This is not counting like the quick back and forth that they have. So what I tried to do is I tried to make something that you could say right in the beginning that takes about 11 to 12 seconds. Now, typically what I noticed in the beginning of interviews, they have more time, but I wanted to kind of like bring it down on the safe side. So I've got one that's like 11 to 12 seconds and one that's 16 seconds. And what I'm trying to do is all those things that I said, right? Like memorable, concrete examples, those sorts of things, centering the victim, right? And so this is what I would maybe start with, something like this. Yeah, so for context, Piers, over 85% of pigs are suffocated in literal gas chambers, and nearly all pigs are castrated with a knife and no painkillers. And that happens on big farms and local farms. But ultimately, they're used and killed when they don't have to die. And that's the fundamental problem, right? That's easily within the time window. And even if you only get the first part off, right, you've still got gas chambers and probably castrated before he interrupts you, right? These are very concrete examples. They're also things that no one knows. I've done a ton of street outreach. No one ever knows about gas chambers. No one ever knows about castration. And no one ever knows that there's no painkillers. So you hit those big points, and then you answer one of the very common objections then is like, well, I just buy from a small local farm. Sorry, my phone is going off here. Well, I just buy from like a small local farm, right? And you've got that all in probably about 8 seconds, right? And so even if he doesn't hear that, he goes, well, you know, I know the farmer that I go to. Then you can be like, well, yeah, like I said, it even happens on local farms. You can even check out this video that, Debug Your Brain did. I mean, so yeah, Nathan, the next time you're on Piers, yeah, just shout out my channel if you need to, if you need to reference local farmings like horrors. But yeah, I think something like this is better, just for those reasons. And I think the other thing you probably want to do at some point is mention Dominion or Land of Hope and Glory. Probably Dominion, honestly, just because the word is shorter. If he's like, I don't believe that. Yeah, just watch Dominion. Everyone should be watching Dominion. And even when you're going back and forth with him, if he asks you something, he's like, just a reminder to watch Dominion, right? Even if you don't respond to all his points, I think just getting the message out there of Dominion to 3 million, potential subscribers is huge. Okay. And so that's why I think, remember, I don't think what you're doing is having a conversation with Piers. You're dodging his shit while you're like talking to specific audiences with your megaphone, okay? And so there's like a little bit of a balance there between like talking like a normal human and then just getting all like, yeah, you guys should watch Dominion, you guys should watch Dominion. So I think stuff like that could potentially be really helpful. I have a slightly longer one here. This one I basically just kind of talk about pigs, the egg industry, and dairy to kind of hit the point of like veganism rather than like, because the first one with just pigs, that could still be like vegetarianism or something. And so this kind of hits all of them. I think this is the better strategy though, because I just don't, in this scenario, I just don't think you have time. I think you just have to like hit people with some shit that they are going to be like, whoa, what the fuck? The other thing too is what I notice in a lot of these critiques is people are like, he's such he's like stuck up or in his high horse or things like that, right? And when you're saying like you shouldn't be doing that, you need to eat, you need to eat less meat, you need to eat cultivated meat, whatever, right? That's inherently going to center them and it's going to draw out defensiveness. And in fact, these entire things are set up as like Piers versus the vegan, right? So this is like two people who aren't the victims fighting. And so what it sort of does is erases the victim from all of this. And that's kind of the problem, right? So not only are you bringing the victim back into it when the victim is sort of being erased just by the very nature of the whole debate, right? But it's also harder to argue with the victim. Like if I'm like, you shouldn't eat meat, the person's like, fuck you. But if I'm like, we shouldn't put pigs in gas chambers, they're not going to be like, fuck you. They're going to be like, yeah, well, obviously that's why I buy from local farms. Or I don't think we should do that. Like we need systemic change. You know what I mean? So it's much harder to argue with that actual point, right? They're going to kind of go different routes, but like they can't argue that it's, you know, unless they're like a straight up sociopath. And even if Piers is a sociopath, he's not going to co-sign gassing pigs on his show because he knows the optics are terrible. Right. So I think that's the smarter route to go. Now, the problem is right, Animal Rebellion is kind of focused on environmental stuff. And so it might be the case that this isn't really their bag to go with, suffering and rights violations of animals. I think even though it isn't, I still think this is probably better. But even if it wasn't, I think maybe then you center the human victim potentially. So like instead of like saying things like, oh yeah, this is like a climate catastrophe, and just these are buzzwords, especially for people in the opposition. They don't mean anything, right? They don't have any sort of like really like emotionally provocative content to them, right? So you would do things like, yeah, well, you know, thousands of families drowned in the floods in Pakistan, right? Families burned to death and their homes were destroyed in the wildfires in California, right? There again, you're at least centering the victim. So this isn't about just like me being like, ooh, I don't want you to eat meat. It's that there's real victims involved. And like Piers isn't going to be like, yeah, it was good that those people burned in their homes, or it was good that those people drowned in Pakistan, right? So I think that's why just like, both from like the actual victim's perspective, I think it's the best thing to do, but I also just think it's like the most, I think for the most part, I don't think it's always the most strategic thing to do, but I think as a heuristic, it's going to be the most strategic thing to do way more often than it isn't. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I think we should be centering the victims. The other thing I think of is like, okay, this is the other thing when I was thinking about critiquing this video. I was like, okay, imagine that I'm going to die tomorrow, and then like my sort of locus of consciousness I know is going to be like reincarnated in a chicken, cow, or pig that's going to be alive in the next like 30 to 40 years, right? If that was the case, right? How would I want Nathan McGovern to be on Piers Morgan? How would I want any vegan to be on Piers Morgan? And if that were the case, I would want them to be centering the victim. I would want them to be talking about gas chambers and castration. I would not want them to just be like playing vegan bingo. And so I think that was kind of clarifying for me because when I first watched it, I kind of had I was like, that didn't feel right to me. Like I didn't like it. And I was trying to figure out what exactly it was about it that I didn't like. And I think thinking about it again, putting yourself in the victim's perspective, like even the future victim, right? It kind of gives you some clarity there. And so that was kind of my like guiding whatever principle. What else here? Oh, other stuff about like front loading your objection handling. So like, this kind of goes with the avocados and the almond thing. So if you're not going to lie, I think you want to answer this. I think you almost want to pre-answer this maybe even in the beginning, or answer it in a way that like, it's hard for him to interrupt, right? So if he says, what about bees or whatever, or the destruction that avocados cause, right? You start off with some stuff. So even factoring in air transport and insect deaths, eating animals is still more destructive, right? That's about as short as I could manage to get it. There might be shorter ways to write this, but again, like front loading that stuff, like even factoring in air transport and insect deaths, eating animals is still more destructive, right? Because any longer than that, and he's going to interrupt you. And when he's like, well, that doesn't make sense, then you can say something like, well, yeah, because animals eat plant food. And so, you know, you always have this multiplier effect. Because animals eat plant food, this is always going to be multiplied. And so be careful here not to say crops. I've noticed this recently. When I say crops, people are like, well, you know, cows, like they eat grass and things that like we can't eat that aren't like crops technically. And so I think I like plant food here better because it still shows that it takes a lot of resources, but people can't get hung up on the like, well, that's not technically crops. Some cows only eat grass. Okay, it is still plant food. It is still taking up land, etc. So I think something like that. And then here again, maybe like try to mention Our World in Data. Like Our World in Data is a fantastic site, by the way, if you want to like see visuals of these things. It's very like, it's very user friendly from like a non-scientist point of view. Like you don't have to be reading through these crazy papers. They just do everything on these infographics that are like very simple and nice. And so like, I think probably Dominion and Our World in Data are two really good things to try to mention and like put in here. And so when he's like, that's not true, how could they, well, just check out Our World in Data. Well, this is like, yeah, but I don't think it's true because like blah, blah, blah. And you're, yeah, I would go to Our World in Data. Everyone check out Our World in Data if you want, you know what I mean? Just plug that site a little bit, you know what I mean? And the same thing with like Dominion. And because if you go on this show and even just plug those things a few times to 3 million people, like even if like, you know, even if a small percentage of people decide to watch that based on that, that's like thousands or tens of thousands of people that might watch Dominion or go to Our World in Data, right? Whereas if you do what he did and just kind of said nothing, like there's no action for me to take afterward. There's nothing I'm going to do after this video but be like, that was kind of weird, you know. So yeah, those are a couple of things I would consider. Oh, the only other thing I thought about too is visual messaging. So whenever he showed that bingo card, right, the camera doesn't have to pan to him. And so it won't, right? So anything you like, if you had like watched Dominion on a piece of paper, they'd probably like pan away from that as well. So I was thinking, well, okay, how could you make it so they couldn't possibly pan away from you? And this might be fucking weird. It might actually make you seem like strange or whatever, but just throwing it out there as an idea. You know, he could have like rolled up his sleeves, or if he was wearing a short sleeve shirt or something, just have something written on your forearm, like have watch Dominion on your forearm, like maybe even both of them. And when you're talking, just keep like turning like and have your arms at all the angles. And then you might be able to just basically advertise Dominion the entire time that you're on there. Again, that would be like a pretty weird thing. People are definitely going to give you shit in the comments. But again, it might just be that like you're playing to the numbers at that point, and just by like law of large numbers, the fact that like Watch Dominion was there so much, people are like, I'm gonna check this out. Like, that's kind of weird that he did that. Like, let me look into that. So yeah, that's just like an idea for visual messaging. I mean, you could also just like stamp it right on your forehead, but that might that might alienate people too much. Yeah. So what else did I have here? Confirmation bias. Oh, so yeah. Let me just show a couple videos here to kind of like, I guess, bolster what I was saying. So there's a couple videos of like people saying stuff, and I think they're very telling. And this one is actually really telling about centering the victim, I think. So let me find this one. Here we go.
But 99.99999999999 whatever to infinity % of people aren't convinced by this type of behavior. They'd be better served, and we discussed this previously, they'd be better served like actually going out and helping clean up the planet and recording it. Like, hey, look at this garbage dump out in the middle of the ocean. Hey, look at how they butcher your cows or something. Now, I've watched the cow butchering video personally. It is pretty brutal. Now, me, I don't care. Okay, I'm still eating some meat. All right, but you might convince some people that way.
Okay, he definitely does care. He definitely did not care. He brought that up because he knew it's convincing, because it's convincing to him on some level. Even the way he paused there. And this is what I'm saying, like, and I'll show you another clip in a second, where it's just this guy's talking about, you know, like, I don't care, like, the environment, the health, whatever, I don't care. And it's because there was no messaging here of the actual, like, victim. And the victim, this is what gets people, okay? This is the most universal thing that people will care about. Will everyone care about it? No. Will some people care about it a little? Yeah. But, like, this is the thing that people are like, that's pretty fucked. You know what I mean? And this guy, the rest of his thing is very hostile to Nathan in this interview. But again, it's just like, this is the lever we want to pull. That's our strongest position, and so we should constantly be taking that position. Let me see another one here.
Right, nah, I'm not going to give you that, mate.
So this dude made basically a list of questions that he's not going to answer, right? Topics he's not going to talk about, right? That he knew that Piers Morgan would bring up. So funny.
Think of them using a...
See, this is what I'm saying. This is what a non-vegan looks at that bingo card and thinks. Oh, so he basically just like said, I'm not going to talk about any of this stuff, all the stuff that Piers typically brings up, right? Like it's not a good look from a non-vegan perspective. That to them it looks cowardly because they're not in our clique. They don't get it. They don't get the inside joke, right? This is like a thing, maybe I said this earlier, like if you're a vegan and you like are talking to a non-vegan and you like call them a carnist, that's weird to them. They don't know what that is. You know what I mean? It's just like, it sounds odd and it's like off-putting. Like you want to use the language of the audience that you're trying to reach. And what that typically means is that you don't want to use any like vegan jargon that we use like amongst ourselves. You know what I mean? Unless you're actually trying to explain carnism to them, like doing a zoom out and be like, hey, this is what carnism is, right? But just like dropping it in isn't going to work in the same way that dropping vegan bingo in here just seems weird to people.
Any questions whatsoever?
No.
You eat avocado.
No.
What do you...
That's super cap. That's super cap. Now, the reason why he's saying no, because he probably watched that interview that Piers Morgan did before with another like climate change, vegan, some activist, right? Some woke activist. And he brought up the example of almonds and avocados, because one of the arguments for why we should go vegan or whatever, not eat meat, is water usage. When, you know...
Yeah. So see, this is what I'm saying. Like, he knows that's bullshit, right? A lot of us knew it was bullshit. If you're going to do a lie, commit to it right away. Don't dodge the question. And maybe pepper in a little something more convincing than just like a simple no. And the other guy in this other video also called bullshit on it. Like, for good reason.
Almonds.
No.
You eat avocado.
All positives and upsides to what you eat, okay? Whether we're talking about overall health or we're talking about the planet, okay? So just mind your own business and I'm gonna mind mine, right? That's how things should be, but these people don't want to do that.
So see, this is the thing again, where he's like, this guy is talking about, oh yeah, he's talking about health, he's talking about the environment, right? Because that's what they talked about. And he's like, that's not your business. Like, this is my business, right? I do think it's harder to say that. Now with the environment, maybe not so much, but I do think it's harder to say that when you're talking about the victim. Like, when you're like, oh, there's a pig getting put into a gas chamber, it's much harder for you to be like, just mind your own business. You know what I mean? So again, I think, and again, these are just a couple of videos, but these two guys I showed you, this guy has 500,000 subscribers. And I think, what's this other dude have, like 800,000 or something insane? Yeah, like, also, like, just as a sidebar, like, look at this production quality here. Like, this, I don't understand how these two dudes have this many subscribers. It is absolutely insane to me based on their production value, or like how they aren't affording better equipment at this point. So that's just me being annoyed by, you know, people having more subscribers than me. But yeah, these are large audiences. And even though this is only two people, most people's audiences kind of think like them, right? Like, it's not just a top down, like he's telling them what to think. They're watching him because they already kind of agree with his views. So I think it's safe to assume that many of the 800,000 people watching this guy, or the 500,000 watching the other guy, probably have pretty similar takes on the interview when they're watching it, especially I think with respect to the sort of vegan bingo thing. But yeah. Did I have anything else? I think that was pretty much everything. Yeah. But yeah, so that's basically my take on it. Again, I just want to, I know I've reiterated this already, but again, I'm not trying to attack Nathan. And this isn't bullshit. I really do think what people in Animal Rebellion are doing is like very brave and ballsy, and like, it's very cool. I'm here for it. Okay. But I just want to, these opportunities to get on Piers are rare, and you only have a small amount of time. So it's a question of, how do I best utilize that time? Because like everything you say, you could have said something else, right? And so we want to look at the opportunity cost of what is the better thing I could have said here. And, you know, how could I have like put out the vegan message more efficiently? Yeah, and more clearly, I think too. What someone said in this thing I thought that was really interesting was, it was on one of these videos. I think it was that one, not this guy's. Yeah, I think it was the actual video itself. But the person was like, so I basically learned nothing from this. And that was kind of what I walked away with, is like, you watch this and you're like, I don't have any new information after watching that 11 minutes of video. That was just like mostly two people like kind of yelling and laughing at each other. Oh, another thing to note too, is I actually think that this interview was better. Despite the fact she had less time to talk, I think she did at least give a clear message in the beginning. And if you look at like the comments and stuff, they're not quite as bad, and fewer people like them, despite I think the fact that this one actually has more views. So this one has a 1.5, and this one's got 1.2. And despite that, like, the negative comments are not as upvoted as they are for Nathan. So people clearly liked Nathan less. And a lot of them were saying things like he didn't answer questions or that bingo thing was like corny or whatever. So yeah. Yeah, so just those are my thoughts. Yeah. So I do feel kind of bad. I was like hesitant to even make this video because like I do want to just totally support everyone in the vegan community, but I felt like making this video was actually supporting him and the vegan community, even if it comes across as like critical or whatever. So yeah. Does anyone have any I guess questions or anything about that, or maybe suggestions or whatever? I don't know. I'll do questions for a little bit here.